This week's episode is brought to you by Silicon Valley Bank. Silicon Valley Bank. Don't panic, everybody. We got this. One man, every sport, every week. This is Pour Center. Hello and welcome back to Pour Center, everybody, a constantly evolving laboratory wherein I try to sum up the biggest sports stories every single week. I'm your host, Kyle the Addict, and I'll be your guide to the full week of sports nonsense, from great games to great races to firings. You're fired. And everything else in between. Because who's got time to deal with failing banks, a failing political system, yet another damn mass shooting, etc., when there's sports on TV? Honestly, those other news stories are just, frankly, a little rude. So, settle in, get comfortable, and let's escape it all together before the ruling class decides we are no longer worth the trouble.
Silent breed is people!
Baseball's back. Major League Baseball has returned, bringing with it some fun new rules, eternal optimism, and some good old-fashioned pre-game patriotism. Take the Milwaukee Brewers, for example, who planned an epic military flyover to start their home opener. They were going to have a military plane called a B-1 buzz the stadium right after the national anthem, but there was one tiny problem. The Brewers forgot to open up the retractable roof due to a bad weather forecast. Whoops! It's okay though, because sources tell me that it was very loud, so people inside the stadium could hear and feel the B-1 as it was flying over the stadium, which is, almost as good as actually seeing it. Luckily for the Brewers, their baseball team came to play and they ended up winning that game 10-0 against the Mets, so maybe they're onto something. Maybe they should do a failed military flyover every game. Who knows? But the best thing that happened in baseball's opening week, however, wasn't anything to do with the new rules. It wasn't anything to do with failed military flyovers. No, it was just good old-fashioned baseball between the Baltimore Orioles and the Boston Red Sox. You see, the Orioles had a 3-run lead in the second game of their series, and they had that 3-run lead for most of the game. By the 7th inning, it had become a 1-run lead, but they were still on top, and they still had every chance to win this game. So, we get to the 9th inning. They get 2 outs, and it's smooth sailing. Their reliever induces a smooth, easy pop fly up, and the game is, It's okay, though. I'm sure the very next batter won't do anything to...
Ref snide on the base. Swing and drive! This one deep! Oh, it's high up ball. That ball should be out! That ball should be out! That ball is out! It is gone!
Say what you want about Baltimore, they sure know how to lose a baseball game. God damn. Still has to feel better than 3 years ago for the Orioles, back when they were just getting massacred every single week. Right? It's actually kind of hard to tell. But nonetheless, damn. Just damn. So yep, baseball is back all right, and in spite of a very small minority of old heads hating on the new rules, I think everything's going to be just fine. Most people appreciate the faster games. Most people appreciate the extra inning rule that leads to no 20-inning marathon games. Nobody actually liked those games. The vast majority of you saying you liked those games, I think you're all liars.
Liar!
That being said, the standings tell us pretty much nothing right now. We're a week into the season, although my team, the Colorado Rockies, have nestled into their traditional spot of 5th in the NL West standings, and it's hard to see them moving too much throughout the season. Everybody else, though, has good reason for optimism, except Phillies fans, who've watched their team lose every single one of their first 4 games just after winning a pennant last season. Now, I know it's only 4 games in a 162-game season, but you know what? Screw that. That's no fun. Let's panic. Trade everybody. Fire everybody.
You're fired!
You're fired.
You're all fired.
Time for knee-jerk reactions and riots, the whole shebang. I don't know if that's necessarily the correct solution, but it's the most entertaining. And isn't that, in the end of the day, what sports are really all about? Sacking season continues. 2 more English Premier League teams fired their managers this week. Chelsea got rid of Graham Potter, and Leicester City parted ways with Brendan Rodgers. This comes hot on the heels of Tottenham getting rid of Antonio Conte last week, leaving 3 coaching vacancies in the top flight of English football. Rodgers was canned after his team lost on a gut punch 94th minute goal. Super late goal. And then he turns around and immediately loses his job. So yeah, he had a pretty rough weekend. but it's tough to miss the logic in why he got canned. Leicester are currently second from dead last in the Premier League, on track to be relegated. And that's pretty amazing given that they just won the league like 7 years ago. That's not that long ago. And now they're on track to be kicked out of the league altogether and have desperately fired Rodgers in a bid to save their season. Leicester have also had to pay, a huge settlement to Rodgers, so I'm sure that will have helped him get over it just a little bit. Meanwhile, at Chelsea, Graham Potter was fired because Chelsea have just had the worst season ever, despite spending the most money ever. They have spent £600 million. That's about $750 million on new players just since the end of the last season, and they are currently sitting 11th place in the league. Chelsea had every intention of letting Potter have the rest of the season in order to figure it out, but it just wasn't happening, and they just kept having awful defeats, awful draws against teams they should have been absolutely destroying. The last straw was a home defeat against perennially mediocre Aston Villa, who beat them 2-0 in front of Chelsea's home fans, and that was it for Graham Potter, who received his walking papers pretty much in the tunnel after the match. This club is used to competing at the very highest level, competing for titles, making it to the Champions League, and they spent a lot of money under new owners. One of the same guys who actually owns the LA Dodgers bought Chelsea, and he has plowed through a ton of money, and it's just not working out at all. So it remains to be seen what happens there. We'll see which of these three teams are able to hire a new manager first, or if everybody's just going to go to the end of the season with their interims. That should be fun. There's about 2 more months left in the Premier League season, in football season altogether. So we'll see what happens there. It should be interesting. I still think that the team should try letting Twitter run the team. Sometimes it would be hard for the crowd to do worse. As far as actual games are concerned, Spurs had a heartbreak draw against Everton where they conceded a super late goal to drop points. A typical weekend for Spurs. Arsenal won yet again, and let me just say, as a Spurs fan, let me extend my heartfelt congratulations to Arsenal Football Club and her fans. You guys have won the league, essentially. It is sewn up. There's no way you guys could lose it now. So go ahead, light up the cigars, pop the champagne. It is over. And I'm not just saying that because I'm trying to jinx you guys. Like, what? I would never do that. Why? Meanwhile, in Germany, Bayern Munich hired a new boss, former Chelsea boss Thomas Tuchel, and immediately won his first game in charge against Borussia Dortmund, crushing them in front of their home fans to the surprise of absolutely nobody. Bayern Munich, imagine firing your coach because you might not win your 11th title in a row. Well, it fucking worked, and now Bayern is on track to keep beating the other German teams into bloody submission. Why do the other teams even bother? I swear. On Kings and Mavericks. The Sacramento Kings have officially qualified for the playoffs, breaking the longest active playoff drought in North America. The Kings hadn't qualified for the playoffs since 2006, back when George W. Bush was president, the Nintendo Wii was still popular, and Twitter had just been born. It's hard to imagine Twitter as an infant website. We really should have killed it in the cradle when we had the chance. Anywho, the Kings locked up their playoff berth in the course of 2 big victories over the Portland Trail Blazers and have posted a lovely montage on Twitter called Receipts, simply calling attention to all of their haters from the preseason. Let's take a look at that.
Richard, does this trade put the Kings in any sort of playoff contention in the West?
No, God, no.
In the play-in tournament, yes, probably so. But making the playoffs in the Western Conference Finals,
Yeah.
I mean, in the Western Conference, I definitely can't see that.
Now, in fairness to those haters, it had been a while since the Kings had actually done anything, and during their epically long drought, they kind of had this stink of everything that they touched turned to shit. I mean, it wasn't that long ago where they were almost moving to Seattle. Oh, wait, shit. That was 9 years ago. That was 9 years ago this team got sold. Wow. What the hell have I been doing for the last 9 years? Oh, yeah, that's right. Well, at any rate, good for the Kings, good for the city of Sacramento. one of the only single sport teams in major sports. They have spent the last decade and a half watching their in-state rivals, the Lakers and the Warriors, have every kind of success under the sun. So it must be nice for them to actually have something to feel good about for once. I remember when I first started watching basketball, the Peja Stojakovic, Chris Webber, Vlade Divac version of the Kings absolutely were killing teams and looking good while doing it. And then Chris Webber tore his ACL and they just sucked for a while. So good on De'Aaron Fox, Domantas Sabonis, and Keegan Murray and company, here to lead the charge into glory, or at least into playoff contention for a team that desperately, desperately deserves it. Good for Sacramento. And meanwhile, on the complete other side of the emotional spectrum, let's check on the Dallas Mavericks. Oh dear. Oh no. So after their big win last week against the Indiana Pacers, they immediately lost 3 games in a row. At this point, the Mavs seem pretty boned, as 2 of their last 3 games are against teams that are either as good or better than them. In the case of, they have 1 game against the Kings, who, as I just talked about, are much better, and the Bulls, who are slightly better, are at least clinging on to a playoff spot. So yeah, the Mavericks have gone from, we can save our season and still make the playoffs, to, yeah, we should probably just shut it down and protect our draft pick status. That is a hell of a fall from grace. But at least they won't have to pay Kyrie, who's going to be leaving them as a free agent this offseason. So, swings and roundabouts, I guess. Not exactly the turnaround they thought they were going to be having, but I guess turning straight down is technically a direction. So it'll be the Utah Jazz and the Oklahoma City Thunder duking it out for that last Western Conference playoff spot, while the East is pretty much settled. I feel like none of these teams has a shot to actually do anything during the playoffs, but hey, drama's drama. Hopefully these teams can have some fun out there on the court and, give us a tasty buzzer beaters or, some brawling en route to being swept in the first round. Open wheel insanity. This past weekend, Formula One ran the Australian Grand Prix, and it gave us some much-needed drama. There was a race for first and second at one point, although, it didn't last. But still, it was a ton of fun, even if I did have to get up at 11 p.m., and of course, this was the race that ended up getting delayed by an hour and a half because of red flags. Shout out to anybody on the East Coast who actually stayed up for the 1 a.m. start time. You would have waited until about 4 in the morning in order to figure out who actually won this race or who finished where. And then after that, a lot of y'all probably would have had to go to work. RIP to whoever your customers, family, and friends might be. Ouch. Anyway, this race started off very promisingly with the Mercedes racing out to a 1-2 jump. George Russell was actually in the lead for a lot of the race, but then he pitted early for fresh tires, thinking that, as the race went on and other people pitted, that he would be able to get back his first place. Unfortunately, about 2 seconds after he pitted, there was a red flag, which meant everybody goes back to the pits, race restarts, and George Russell's advantage was completely negated, screwing him out of what was almost certainly a podium finish. However, that didn't screw him nearly as hard as his car catching fire, which happened about 10 or 20 laps after the restart. Ouch. That's a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day for George Russell. But at least he did better than Ferrari, since Charles Leclerc crashed out on the first lap, and Carlos Sainz, well, we'll get to him in a second. The first red flag restart was after Alexander Albon of Williams wrecked his car, kicking up a bunch of gravel onto the track as well as carbon fiber bits from his car. And Australia, the Grand Prix circuit there has to red flag a little bit more, just because it's such a narrow track, so they really just don't have the runoff space. So they ended up having to red flag this race. After that restart, Max Verstappen took the lead and was never really in any serious danger of losing this race. Typical. He's in a fucking spaceship, and he's definitely going to win the title this year. So that's great. But nonetheless, the race for the rest of the podium was fun. Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton had a pretty tight fight. Everything was going pretty smoothly in this race. Everything was proceeding more or less as planned, except for Leclerc and Russell, until around the 55th lap, when Kevin Magnussen of Haas managed to wreck his car, throw a bunch of debris and a wheel onto the track, causing the second red flag restart of the race. Now this is where things got really spicy, because the FIA brought in everybody into the pit lanes. The idea was that it was going to be a 2-lap shootout to determine who was going to win the race. Sounds awesome, right? Yeah, except during that second red flag restart, everybody lost their damn minds. Logan Sargent ran into Nick DeVries, the two Alpine drivers ran into each other, and Ferrari's one remaining driver, Carlos Sainz, spun over Fernando Alonso. All of this before we got past the first third of the racetrack, which led to that whole lap pretty much being nullified, and the FIA ended up doing what they didn't really want to do, which was ending the race under the safety car. So, yeah, bit of an anticlimax, but still a hell of a race. Fernando Alonso was able to basically lawyer his way back onto the podium for the second race in a row. Carlos Sainz took a 5-second penalty when he was running in, I believe, either third or fourth place, while the 5-second penalty bumped him out of the points altogether. And he took it quite well.
No, please, ask them, please, to wait and discuss with me. Clearly the penalty is not deserved, it's too severe.
Well, the F1 race was good, but it wasn't the race of the weekend. The top race of the weekend was actually IndyCar at the Texas 375 at Texas Motor Speedway. This was a fantastic, action-packed race, a great advertisement for oval racing in general. We had a great fight for the lead between Joseph Newgarden, Pato O'Ward, Scott Dixon, and even Roman Grosjean was poking his head up there for a second. This was a crazy, intense, action-packed race all the way through, and it went all the way, and it would have gone all the way down to the wire. Unfortunately, once again, there was a wreck toward the end of the race. Roman Grosjean did a Roman Grosjean thing and wrecked himself out of the race at the very end. Some things never ever change. But anyway, at least that was with about 2 laps around the oval to go, and it was still a pretty tight fight all the way to the end. Joseph Newgarden ended up winning, and Pato O'Ward will have felt kind of crappy about that loss. Even though second place is still pretty good, he will have felt pretty crummy because at one point earlier in the race, O'Ward was lapping everybody. He had almost lapped the entire field, but then a caution showed up and wiped all that away. Nonetheless, a great race all the way through, and if you haven't checked out IndyCar recently, you probably should. Their next race is in about 2 weeks at the Long Beach Grand Prix circuit, and that is actually perfect for F1 fans because, as F1 fans will know, F1's taken an impromptu month off for the entire rest of April and will not be back until the very last day of April for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Now, this is because they were supposed to have a mid-April race in China, but then China decided to actually fight their COVID pandemic instead of, I don't know, pretending it wasn't real or COVID zero, whatever the fuck they were doing. And, well, now nothing interesting is happening in China for a little while. Stupid COVID still getting people sick. Stop getting sick, you cowards. UConn ruins everything. San Diego State managed to pull off an incredible comeback in the Final Four. They had an incredible matchup against FAU, the Florida Atlantic Owls, that absolutely nobody predicted. But even less predictable, the Owls actually took a pretty long lead. They were up by 13 at one point against San Diego State before San Diego State was able to whittle that down, pull off an incredible comeback, and then they pulled off the most unbelievable buzzer beater of the year, probably one of the top buzzer beaters in the history of college basketball. Unbelievable. What a shot by Lamont Butler, we all thought he was just dawdling, 2 seconds left and he's just being very casual, and he just kind of turns around, chucks it up, and holy shit, the Aztecs win. Absolutely wild. Meanwhile, in the other Final Four game, UConn dismantled their opponent, the Miami Hurricanes, yet again, because this is what UConn has been doing the entire tournament so far, just turning all of their opponents to paste. Pretty insane. They literally, their 13-point win over Miami was the closest game they had the entire tournament. I mean, that's fucking crazy. What a performance by UConn. We had a lot of good reason to hope that with San Diego State's good defense, decent enough shooting, that maybe, just maybe, the title game would be close.
I'm sorry. I'm really...
It sure wasn't. It sure was not close at all. San Diego State gallantly lost by 17 points. At one point in the second half, they gave us all hope by making it a 5-point deficit with about 7 or 8 minutes left on the clock. And then UConn called a timeout, their coach got their shit together, and the beating continued. Well, that's pretty disappointing.
Disappointed!
Stupid UConn. I mean, you can't even be mad. They literally crushed every single opponent by double digits. Absolutely insane. UConn clearly came to play and were by far the best team to show up in March Madness this year. Although, I gotta say, other college basketball teams, come on, guys. Y'all couldn't even make it close. Like, I get that they're good, but for none of y'all to get within, like, 10 or 5 points of them, that's pretty poor. Pretty poor. UConn are good, but I don't know if they were that good. But nonetheless, they are the champions. There will be no new champion in college basketball this season. Stupid Miami and San Diego State. Could have been so much fun. We could have had an all-beach school or even an all-Florida final. Instead, UConn had to squash all of our hopes and dreams. And unfortunately, UConn's dominance does prevent this from going down as a classic or greatest March Madness of all time. But we'll always have that 16-1 upset, Fairleigh Dickerson over Purdue. We'll always have some of the great dunks, the great memories, the Lamont Butler buzzer beater. It was a great tournament, even if it probably won't go down as an all-timer. Sad. Well, that about wraps it up for this week. Next week, we'll check up on the NBA playoff races, which will be ending with the rest of the season next Sunday. The NHL still has another week or so to go after that. We'll take another look at NASCAR, which will be the only major race running next weekend. And we'll take a look at whatever else needs to be covered. Maybe there'll be NFL news, but I seriously doubt it. Thank you so much for watching this week. And remember, kids, optimist is just another word for idiot. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.